Good morning. My name is Rochelle Lee. I'm president of Einblau Associates, and I would like to welcome you and thank you for being here with us this morning. Our event is a discussion group about grief and loss and facing that together in the workplace. And to start off with, I would like to introduce you to Laura Jones. Laura is a grief recovery method specialist, and she also has a lot of experience in a corporate leadership environment in the finance industry. And so she's here today to talk to us about what grief really is and what types of losses our staff might be facing and how we can help support them so we can create an environment where they can continue to do their work, but also feel like they have access to resources and to people who understand that they might be going through something that is really difficult in their lives. So thanks again for being here. After Laura's keynote presentation, we will be meeting as peer groups to be delving into this topic even more and share what we've learned in managing our staff through this time. So thanks very much, Laura, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody today. You know, it's somewhat fitting that this is Mental Health and Awareness Week, but I would like to point out some important distinctions that grief and loss are not mental health issues. They are natural and normal reactions to the experiences and events that occur in our lives. You know, grief really is a taboo subject. It's something people aren't comfortable talking about. We talk about death with ease. We talk about murder. I mean, these things are all over the news. They're in the books we read, the movies we go to, the television programs. We can talk about death and we can talk about anything of that nature. But when it comes to the heart of the matter, it's much more difficult to share our feelings for so many of us. And a lot of that can go back to the way we were socialized, the way we were raised, the belief systems that we grew up with. You know, depending on your own circumstances, you may have some very specific ideas around what grief is or what it isn't. As Rochelle mentioned earlier, a lot of people are quite comfortable saying, well, you know, grief is about when somebody you love dies, or maybe it's even about when somebody, you know, you loved divorces you. But it's sometimes hard to think in terms of other context about that. You know, and as business leaders, you know, we often look at things as a problem that needs fixing. Well, that's not the case when it comes to grief and loss. We don't get to fix other people. What we get to do is support them. We get to be present for them. We get to listen to them as a heart with ears instead of criticizing, analyzing, or judging them. We get to be present and support them in that manner, just being of help to them by being that trusted person in their life. Now, that's maybe jumping ahead a little bit. So first of all, I want to provide a definition or a couple of definitions about grief. So the Grief Recovery Institute defines grief as the normal and natural reaction to loss or change of any kind. It's also the conflicting feelings caused by an end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. So COVID-19 has provided us with multiple changes in behavior. You know, everything that was once familiar no longer is. We aren't able to go to the office as we once went to the office, although some of you are still going to the office, but we're not there with our colleagues and coworkers. We have that loss of connection with our family, our friends, you know, the gym, the sporting events we used to go to. That's another loss, or a loss of routine, the loss of the life that we once knew. You know, all of a sudden we're homeschooling, our children around all the time, we've lost childcare, we've lost so many things that were familiar and natural to us. And now many people might not really think of those as being losses, and certainly maybe not grieving events. But if you put it into that perspective of that change in behavior and a loss of the familiar, you know, it makes a little bit more sense. Again, you think about a loss of control. I don't know what's going to happen. And that can be very unsettling for a lot of people. You think about a loss of safety. I don't know whether or not I might catch this. What precautions do I have to take? Is it safe for me to go back to the office? You know, and worries that accompany all of those things. Worries about parents, elderly parents perhaps, or people, you may even have loved ones, or people in your circle may have loved ones that are dying. And so there's that tremendous fear about not being able to see them, not being able to connect with them. There's also that loss that might be associated with canceled vacation plans, canceled graduations, wedding ceremonies, funerals even. I mean, all of those things look so much differently during this period There are unrealized hopes, dreams, and expectations as well. And so for a lot of people, that can really be very difficult for them. However, again, because the way we've been socialized, some people just don't think of those as losses. They think it's like, it is what it is. Suck it up, buttercup. You just have to get through it. Don't cry over spilled milk. You just show up and get the job done. Some people can do that with relative ease. Others, maybe not. So it's important, I think, to have that open and honest dialogue with the people you have reporting to you, or your colleagues or your coworkers. Now, it's important to note that you have to have trusted relationships with these people. They have to feel comfortable telling their emotional truth about things, and that isn't always easy. And so as leaders, it's important if we can go first and talk about how we're feeling and how we're experiencing things, to be vulnerable in front of our employees, although difficult and challenging at sometimes, will do so much to create that sense of trust and unity. So for example, if I went up to somebody and said, gee, you know, I'm really worried. My grandmother's in a long-term care facility in Edmonton, and even though there haven't been a lot of outbreaks there, there have been so many in Calgary, and I'm really fearful that she could catch this disease and die. Well, as a leader, you know, you can articulate that, and that then invites the conversation from an employee to say, yeah, I can relate to that. You know, my grandmother's in a facility in Calgary, and although it hasn't been impacted at this point, I'm really worried about her. And with worries and concerns like that can come a great sense of mental preoccupation. And so if we are mentally preoccupied with things that are completely out of our control, it can keep us out of the moment. It may heighten our inability to be fully present in the workplace. So although we all have an expectation of our employees to, you know, do the job that they're being tasked to do, it's helpful if we can also step back a little bit with some compassion and to think about, what are they going through? Are they ones who chat about or talk about what they may be going through, or do they tend to be silent? Now, if they tend to be silent, again, that's where you have the opportunity to just sort of touch base and check in. Now, it might be, you know, you don't really seem to be yourself these days. Is there something going on that you'd like to talk about? You know, but you want to provide people with assurances that what they say is going to remain in confidence, unless there's some, you know, business reason that it can't. That what they're going to say is going to be heard with compassion and empathy, not with judgment and criticism, because that's one of the biggest fears that employees have in the workplace. I think it's that worry that you're going to judge me. If I tell the emotional truth about myself, if I let my feelings be known, you're going to think I'm weak. You're going to think I'm less than. You're going to start questioning my competency. And so when those are thoughts in the back of one's mind, you're going to be less likely to be upfront about it, unless, again, that culture has created such a safe space for people to tell the emotional truth about what's going on. You know, we know statistically that EAP programs are highly underutilized, and they're underutilized for those reasons. People are afraid that even though they're supposed to be confidential, if word gets out that somebody's seeing a psychologist, or if word gets out that somebody had to go to treatment for an addiction issue, or if word got out that somebody's on a medical leave, that there's something wrong with them. And if you think that way, and if you approach something with that attitude, you're not likely to want to come forward and tell the truth about yourself, because you don't want to be perceived as somebody who has something wrong with them. So again, the invitation is to try and open that dialogue. And if you see an employee struggling, if they seem to be out of sorts of some sort, you know, it might be indicative that they are struggling differently than perhaps you are or some of your other colleagues are. For example, people may have an increased, they may demonstrate increased agitation, frustration, or anger. Perhaps that's uncharacteristic for them. There might be a perceived reduced ability to manage stress levels and the workloads and the tasks that are being assigned. They might have reduced patience and tolerance levels. Their ability to cope seems lessened. They might appear to be disconnected or disengaged. They might be unable to meet deadlines or performance requests. So if those are things you're noticing, you know, that invites a conversation. Again, you seem to be a little off. Is there something going on that you need to talk about? There are a multitude of resources available to us. Again, from EAP programs within organizations, again, even though people might not be inclined to take them or look into them, to have a leader say, you know, I would really strongly encourage you to consider this as an option if you're really struggling. There is no shame in reaching out for help. Help is something that we all need at some point in time in our lives, and I encourage you to do that. Again, creating that sense of safety. There are, you know, all kinds of resources from the Canadian Mental Health Association. Again, resources such as, we talked about it last week, if domestic violence increases during this period of time. So Sheriff King House or whatever your local domestic violence or domestic home telephone numbers are. Suicide hotlines, distress centers, you know, it might be 12-step programs, AA, NA, CA, GA, SA, Al-Anon, any of those things that might be helpful to somebody. You don't know, somebody might have a husband or a wife at home that is an alcoholic or a drug addict, and their behavior is really weighing down on your employee. But again, because of shame and a fear of being judged, they may not bring that forward to the surface. So it's, I think, important to make available different resources to your employees. Now that might be something that's part of a conversation, that might be something that goes out in a general email. So you're not pointing fingers, you're not making assumptions, you're not making judgments, you're just saying, here are a list of various resources for you. We also know that people who aren't able to express feelings, they just end up keeping them in like a storage tank in the body. So think of it to having a steam kettle on the oven and jamming a cork in that, having the heat turned up high. Sooner or later, that cork is going to blow. Well, that can happen with unexpressed emotions as well. So if we're not routinely talking about what we're feeling or doing something to get those feelings out of us, they will start to accumulate, and they can be cumulatively negative. And from that perspective, they'll end up coming out in other ways as well. For example, increased alcohol or drug use. That's a really important one at this particular point in time. You see it all over social media or the news. Alcohol sales and cannabis sales are through the roof. And they're through the roof because people are using these substances to, or some may be using these substances to numb the way they're feeling. You know, some people, it's a party and lots of fun and whatnot, but there is a segment of the population that will use these differently, and they will have negative impact on them. You also see the humorous, you know, social media posts, oh, mommy needs wine to teach the kids, or mommy needs wine to make dinner, or mommy needs wine to, you know, get out of bed in the morning. You know, again, this is intended to be playful, but for some people, it's anything but playful. It's the sad reality. And you may or may not have people in your organization who are impacted that way, or they may have spouses or children that are impacted that way. But if they are, that addiction piece is devastating to them, and they need help, they need resources, and those are things that you can provide. Other things that people may be doing, they may be exercising more than they used to, or they may be binge watching TV or streaming services. They might be online all the time on social media, could be gaming or smoking or vaping or doing just about anything to get out of feeling for themselves. It might be eating, it might be baking, it might be cleaning the fridge and the house like a frenzied person. It may be doing yard work. Again, anything in small doses can be wonderful, but if taken to the extreme, so that the sole purpose is to numb out the feelings, that's another matter entirely, but it won't remove the grief and loss that you're feeling. You know, there are different actions that one needs to take to address grief and loss. You know, workaholism is another one, and something that I certainly had my periods of time with. You know, I didn't want to deal with sad or painful emotional feelings. So, you know, it was easy to spend 12 hours a day at the office and then to go in on a Saturday and a Sunday just to get out of my head, because there was always enough work to do. And so, you know, those are some of the things that we can look at. So again, they can be effective short term, but in and of themselves, they will not relieve anybody of any grief or loss issues they're feeling. You know, some of the other things about grief and loss, we may have some preconceived notions about that, again, based on how you were socialized. But oftentimes we hear things like, Well, say you were a teenager and you just went through your first breakup. Oh, don't feel bad. There are plenty of fish in the sea. Or you have to be strong for those around you. You can't show that you're crying or how emotional you are about the loss of your mother or your father. You need to be strong for your children, or you need to be strong for your siblings. You know, those put unrealistic expectations on us, and again, can be very harmful to people who are grieving. It's not helpful to compare losses. While one might think that if I lost my husband to cancer and you lost your husband to divorce, that my loss is worse than yours. But that's not fair, because we all experience our own grief at 100%. We all experience, you know, the biggest grief is the grief we're going through. So it does a disservice to ourselves if we think, well, I only got divorced and Rochelle lost her husband, so my loss isn't as bad as hers. And then sometimes we may hear, or we may even say things that might be intellectually accurate but emotionally barren, in making comments. Well, you're young, you can find another husband. Or you're still young, you can marry again. Or for those who perhaps had a loss associated with a hope and a dream and expectation around a particular job. Well, it wasn't the right job for you. You know, you can always look for other work. If you'd had your heart set on leaving where you are to go somewhere else, that's a big loss. You know, and those are some of the other tangible losses. It's job loss, it's moving, it's health changes. I mean, imagine having a relationship with a parent and all of a sudden they get Alzheimer's disease. The parent that you used to know and love is no longer there. So that's a huge loss, and one that needs to be considered. You need to think about the relationship you used to have will never be again, but you create a new relationship. And that's part of what, you know, I've learned through doing the grief recovery method work, which is an action program. It's an evidence-based program, and you take a number of action steps to complete some of the pain associated with that. Rochelle, how am I doing for time?
So if we could wrap up in about a couple of minutes or so.
Okay. All right.
Because we're a small group and we're going to be one peer group, we can have a few minutes. Okay.
Just to circle back then to some of the things that if you're going to sit down and have a conversation with your employees that I'd go to. Again, many of you may think that as a leader, it's your job to fix something. It's not. It's your job to be a supportive listener, to hold space for somebody. And if it's not something you feel it's within your realm or something you're not comfortable with, is there somebody else within the organization, another trusted person? Maybe it's someone in HR, maybe it's you know, a branch administrator or another executive that has that open heart and can speak easily with people. You know, you want to meet with staff in a private area where there won't be interruptions, where there's privacy. You may want to have Kleenex on hand in case it becomes emotional for them. You want to ensure them that what's going to be said is going to be held in confidence, again, assuming there's a trusted relationship and that there's nothing that's going to bar you from keeping their trust. You might want to, again, talk about your own circumstances first. By being vulnerable, you create safety for others, talking about what your challenges may be, inviting them to share their own. You know, again, it might be, I'm feeling really overwhelmed with the workload these days and I don't really know how to handle it sometimes. Might invite them to say, I'm feeling the same, I'm having a hard time meeting my duties. So let's talk about that. Is there something that we can help you through? Because we do have expectations that you need to get your jobs done. It's a completely different thing if somebody needs to take an absence from the workplace because their spouse died, than somebody who's feeling off because, you know, these changes aren't really resonating, aren't sitting well. You know, so again, you've got performance issues on the one hand, you've got, you know, a grief issue on the other hand. So I think, again, open and honest dialogue. It's not a one size fits all. So having those open and honest discussions makes a difference. So you really know where your employees are, where they're at emotionally. Holding space is really important, listening to them without giving them advice or without criticizing them or judging them. Don't be dismissive dismissive of what they're sharing. Don't be distracted. Stay in the moment with them, which can be really difficult for us. Look at them. Don't start looking at your phone or out the window or whatever. Pay attention to what they're saying. If you have to, ask questions to gain clarity. If you can, paraphrase what they're saying so that they understand and you understand that you're on the same page. So that if you use one word and they say, no, that's not it, this is it. Again, having a list of different organizations that can provide help and resources for them. Consider if there are different options in the workplace. Again, as we're returning to the workplace, if people are really afraid to come into the workplace, what allowances can you make for them? Can they stay at home? Can their workstations be protected in some way? Do you have all the hand sanitizer and washing stations necessary? Have you explored other options if they are in conflict with people? Can they have reduced workloads? Can they have staggered work hours? Again, depending on what an organization is looking to and demanding from their employees, to be able to be sensitive to some of the real needs would be really helpful. So it might be, we're planning on coming back to the office on, June the 15th. How are you feeling about that? These are the safety measures we have in place. Are you comfortable with this, or would you be more comfortable staying in the home? If they're having performance issues, again, can you help me understand what's going on here? Can you express some of your worries or concerns that I can help perhaps address? Again, different tools. What are the different tools that might be available to you? But I think, at the basic level, it's that heartfelt, emotional place where it's, what are your needs and what can I do to help address your needs? Because, again, a workplace culture that demonstrates care and concern is going to get, I think, a better end result from its employees. If they feel like they matter, if they feel like they make a difference, I think the ultimate result is going to be much better for them. Certainly that was my experience. I've got a lot of lived experience. I had the grief recovery training over 15 years ago, and those things helped me as a manager in the workplace. It allowed me to view my colleagues, coworkers, direct reports differently. It wasn't always easy, and I worked with a lot of A-type personalities, and touchy-feely wasn't their thing. But at least they knew that there was an open door policy. At least they knew that I was approachable, and that I would welcome them without judgment or criticism. But that said, I also had, they had needs that they had to meet. They had to do what required to be done, save for those. And there were some that needed to take medical leaves of absence. And that makes things harder in the workplace when that happens. But if we can do more to be proactive, if we can do more to look after our employees on the front end, then perhaps we prevent some of those things from happening. Anyways, that's all I've got to share. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. Sorry, do you mean to rush you there at the end? There is so much to talk about with this subject. Thank you. Very helpful. As I was listening to you, I was thinking about everybody that's on this meeting right now, and what we do best is problem solve, right? That's how we got to where we are in our careers. At this point in time, though, that makes it really challenging. And the other thing I was thinking too is different, when you were talking about how different things affect people in different ways and how to hold space for that. So if you're happy and optimistic, and I'm on another peer group, and there's a gentleman there, wonderful guy, but he's always fantastic. And you notice that what happens with everybody else is they kind of quiet down because they can't live up to that. So they feel outside. And if they're feeling low, how are you going to express that when someone is always fantastic?
I might challenge that.
Well, exactly.
Like, I'm fine, and other lies that I tell.
Right. So we did create some questions, and I thought I would challenge us by asking the first question, which is about reflecting on your own personal life. What losses have you experienced in our lives? And, let's try that vulnerability on for size a little bit here and see how that is when we're talking about our own self with peers who are also going through the same thing.
Loss, and I think those are important conversations to have. Grief is something that we all experience multiple times throughout the course of our lifetime. If we acquire the tools and skills on how to process and to move through that, it will make our lives better and the lives for those around us better. Now, there are a multitude of different ways of acquiring skills and tools that may help you. Again, professionals, it might be through a support group, it might be through a religious entity, it might be through family and friends. But again, to be able to talk about what you're going through, to be able to take some action that might help you move forward is going to make that different. There's no right and there's no wrong way to grieve. There are no set stages for grief. I mean, that gets a lot of airplay, but you know, grief isn't linear. Grief is not a mental health condition. Not everybody who experiences a loss is going to be in denial. If somebody dies, it's hard to say you're in denial when you've been to a funeral. You may or may not have anger around a loss. If your 92-year-old grandmother passes away after a brief illness, you might not be angry. But, you know, in Roger's case, Roger might have been angry. And, you know, how heartbreaking, not angry, okay. But, you know, that may be the case with some. You know, another one of the purported stages was bargaining. Well, again, you might want to say, well, if given a chance, I'll try and live differently. But, you know, that doesn't work if you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
Some people may feel a sense of depression. Some people may be anxious. Some people may not be able to concentrate, but not everybody's going to feel all of these things. And, you know, the last stage that was purported was acceptance, that you'll find acceptance. Well, you may or you may not. So grief, everybody will experience grief in their own way because all relationships are individual and unique. Not helpful to tell somebody that you can, you know, again, find another spouse, find another job, move to a different house, regain something you lost. Just be conscientious about what you're saying to people. Words matter. You know, you might think, well, you know, your grandmother lived a good long life, and that may be true, but my heart is broken, so I can't hear what you're saying. Or if you say, you know, something again along those lines, just think about the words. Words matter.
One of the things, you know, I want to reflect on that Lisa said about there are going to be days, and oh, it's one of those days. And when you shared that, Lisa, I almost felt permission that, hey, I might be able to do that too. Like maybe I could just take a break for half a day and not worry about being at my computer. And so just by sharing, then other people, you might be giving other people permission to do similar things or to be able to be more open. So Laura, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. And